Yeah, and I guess what's interesting, I guess, beyond the interview is if you feed that into like how he's coming across, and we're only a couple of months away from the election, etc. How that's all sort of playing into how he's going. The thing that I wanted to throw in here as a side note was Allan Lichtman, this history professor that has been following U.S. elections for a long time and has apparently accurately predicted the outcome of every US election since 1984 through a system he's called the 13 Keys, which is not related to polls. It's a whole other set of standards that he is actually applying to it. He's saying Trump will lose based on this system that he's got, and that's what his prediction is going to be for 2020. Obviously, he keeps saying, as a caveat, it's not always, something that necessarily will, be a fait accompli, but he's got a pretty good run so far of predicting every election, with the possible exception of 2000, where he actually predicted Gore's victory, but he still stands by his prediction because the Supreme Court decided that one.
Oh, jeez. Well, okay. Okay. Well, that's not really an unbroken run. The other thing I'd say is that anyone who thought that a system that had worked for the previous 36 years would work in 2020 is very brave as well. This is an exceptional year. I don't think I think all bets are off. I mean, for what it's worth, I think Trump is behind, and I think that's primarily because of his handling of COVID has really exposed him in the US. But I will say this, and obviously I don't live in the States and I don't follow their politics that closely, but I haven't seen a lot of Biden. Yeah. Biden appears very, very distant, whereas Trump is always fronting up to the cameras, good, bad, or ugly, or even worse than that. He's still showing up. And I think that that presence, the closer we get to polling day, will allow him to probably activate voters as we get closer, which is kind of what happened last time. So if Joe Biden falls into the same trap as Hillary Clinton, he could find himself in the situation. So I guess maybe that's the only thing I'd say is maybe that's where 2016 and 2020 are similar in that it's Biden's election to lose, but I don't know that Trump can do it this time. But I would never say never.
Yeah, well, like as you said, anything can happen. But there's also maybe another point to consider too is making like all this commentary around, like they're looking at 2016 and trying to find a prediction for what will happen in 2020 and saying that, well, Trump was able to do X, Y, and Z in 2016, so, he could do it in 2020. But it's I heard an analogy put out there. It's a bit like, like say a sporting team that was down and they just got across the finish line and won the game, last week. And then it would be a mistake to think that they could just replicate the same performance the following week, let alone 4 years later, if we're taking that analogy to that extent. There's nothing to say that Trump could replicate what he did in 2016. But likewise, you could also say that there's nothing to say that Biden would end up suffering the same fate as Clinton. It could be all over the shop. You just don't know how it could end up turning out.
Well, that's the right response. I mean, because when it comes to data, you can't base data on a single set. The more data you have, then obviously the better it is, in terms of making a prediction. It's interesting, Trump won what everyone thought was an unlikely victory. But the reality is we might see him win another unlikely victory for a different set of circumstances this time around. And, then at least you'd have two data sets to look at and compare. So I wouldn't write him off. Personally, I can't see how he can win because I think COVID has really damaged him. And I can't see how he can possibly get more votes because he needs more votes than last time, I think, to win. But having said that, all it takes is one stumble from Joe Biden or, just something not falling into place for the Democrats, and it could all turn out very ugly for them again. And if there was one weakness, I think that'll really tell for Biden will be his age in the last 4 or 5 weeks of campaigning. We'll see.
Well, at the very least, it's going to be an interesting election season, like it always is, I guess. It'll be, and I think, it's telling. It's almost like Biden's ability, I guess, to stand up, I guess, more than anything else.
Stand up and do more than just wave.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to say something that means something.
Exactly. But contrast that with Trump's inability to label the coronavirus pandemic as fake news, which was clearly not something that he could do.
And I think that's really what's made him look very foolish.